Alright everybody, here's another problem I encountered this week. It's never ending. But I have a fellow YouTuber here in Nashville that needed a trim motor replaced. I just did a fuel pump on his motor, and his brother needed his trim motor replaced because it was really intermittent, and this was the old motor. This looks pretty bad. These are very simple. They're just an electric motor. You know, you got your armature, and it goes down in here to the brushes, and a lot of times your brushes go bad. I mean, we can even maybe see if we can, if it'll crack. I don't know if it'll crack, but come off of there. Alright, when I want to kind of show this, I can't, but maybe we can look down in here. I don't know. You know, there's your brushes. The brushes don't look bad, but the wire just deteriorated, you know, from being in the water. Just over time, they just take a beating. They're usually made pretty robust, where like this is a new one. It's got really good wiring. But sometimes they're simple, sometimes they're not. And it seems like it always never fails. Whenever I think something is really simple, it turns out to not be simple. So we're replacing the motor. Depending on how you get your motor on your engine, if you can get to the bolts or you can't get to the bolts, if you got a jack plate in the way, or if you got the transoms in the way, it just, you know, is one of those things. You know, like, can you get to the motor, can you not get to the motor? Sometimes they're real simple, and then sometimes they're not. So this one ended up being not simple. So I had to take this motor apart, because this is your pump. This is your motor. They work in tandem. So the way it works is down in here, you got a seal. And this seal rides on that shaft. So this piece, this is off a Mercury 90 horsepower motor, and it only has 2 bolts that holds this little bracket, which is usually attached to your motor. And then you got these big long bolts that go through the armature, and it has a little ring here on the, so any water can't intrude into the motor. And it's got some little gaskets that go around, and there's usually a O-ring that goes here. On the pump, you have these series of O-rings, and you also have these little ports, and they just work on pressure, depending on how the motor goes. And there's like little BBs that are check valves. Basically some check valves in here. This is obviously maybe how it pulls hydraulic fluid up, and then how this turns allows the little check valves in here to open and close. And when they're, it's sort of like a, like an, it works kind of like an impeller, I guess, where it builds up pressure in there, and it sends it out or pulls it back in. So in reverse, you know, it might put pressure, takes the hydraulic fluid, builds the pressure, sends it back out. You got a piston ram goes up. Some of the motors, they have two small rams, and that also helps push the pressure down when it's going down. Anyway, it's not mysterious. I've got one bolt out there, but so what happened? Alright, well, this is the new pump, because this is the pump section of your motor. This pump would not go down in the housing. They are identical. I have the other pump is on the engine right now, just to keep it in there, to keep any debris or anything falling down in it, and I've got it covered up. But this pump would not go in the housing. They are identical. So first thought that maybe it was the O-rings was preventing it from going down and sealing. So it would go to a certain point and then it just would not go down into the housing. And you know, your first inkling is like, well, it's not lined up correctly, what have you. Haven't done one in a long time, so maybe last summer. And then usually they're real simple. I mean, you just take the motor and you take it off, put the new one on, and you're good to go. But this one would not go down into the housing. So it goes flush into this housing, this pump does. You know, of course the motor is attached. There's our 4 screws that holds the armature onto here. So I thought, well, it's got to be just an O-ring. So what I did was I had this all attached, and I put our 2 screws that hold this bracket down, and I knew better than do this, but I did it. Pushing this one down, a lot of torque on it, and it wouldn't move, wouldn't budge. And then what happened was that, here's the other one. This is the old one. This little ear breaks off. These motors are not cheap. I mean, depends on the engine really. But they'll do like a clean break. You can see that one's really, you know. So this one broke. Well, I didn't care because it was the old one. I thought maybe, because originally what happened was this one broke. I'm like, oh, geez, man. So I thought, well, I'll just take this one off, put it on there, because this one was at that point was still good. I hadn't broken it, hadn't done anything to it yet. And I thought, I just swapped the little bracket part of it and it'll be fine. Not sure where I was that day in my thinking. So this is a test, or to show you guys, hey man, this will happen to anybody. But I broke it. And then I continued on, and I broke this one. Now you can see I sealed it back up with some JB weld, but of course we don't know how much pressure is up, pushing up on this. We don't know if this will last. I mean, I could do a little paint. It may seal, may not. There's a little better look on the bottom there, you can see. Another thing too, when you're doing a JB weld, like you can, you know, you set your part on there, set it up, and then this takes 24 hours to dry, but you could come back, like say after, I don't know, 12, 14 hours or whatever, and then just take a utility knife, and any excess you can just cut it off. It'll still be pliable enough that you can do that. And so I cleaned it up, and this was just a test. I really didn't know what to do. But we got another bracket coming. You can't get the bracket. You just may have to search a little bit to find it. But you can't get this bracket. And you know, I don't blame anybody but myself here, because this bracket, once it's damaged, I mean, you don't want to, I don't know, you don't want to really reuse this, because I could torque this down, I could just break again. I got the old pump. Actually, the problem was the motor, so it wasn't the pump. So I was going to try again to see if I could get this pump to go in there. I've tried a couple times, it would not go. So I still think it's, I don't know a couple things. Like, when they machined this, did they just, like, this was just slightly too big, and then, you know, it won't fit in there. These are precision milled, so you're gonna have problems with this if you don't, you know, if you don't do this right. But they're precision milled, and you know, it won't go in. No matter what I tried, it will not go in. The other one goes in. Now I do still have to tap it down. Everything from visual inspection looked great. Very clean. We'll keep this piece. We'll get the other bracket, put this motor back together, and put it on the engine. Now, on this Mercury 90, what we had to do for this, and you guys might have to do this, you may have to, which was a good thing. Actually, it was a really good thing, because I have a little lift, it's a little, you know, car engine lift, and I floated the engine and pulled it off the transom, and when we did that, we noticed that the bolts were pretty much really pretty shot. Wasn't sealed up. You should probably seal your transom, you know, every couple of years. I know some fiberglass guys are like, you got to do it every year, but I don't think that. Anyway, so what Tim did was, for his brother, we got new bolts for the transom to mount the engine back, and we also got this bracket. So new bolts, and I mean, these bolts are under a lot of torque, so even though they look good, they may have been stretched and weakened, and just replace them is what I would recommend. Because you don't know, you just don't know. You don't want something bad to happen. So a lot of maintenance on these motors, man. You can't just skip steps, and you can't get in a hurry like I did, thinking, oh, this should be a, you know, I quoted him really cheap because he was a YouTube guy, and really good guys, and if it would have been like most of the ones I've done, it would have been a, you know, a good deal. So I don't know, you know, I mean, was this I don't know, a Chinese, I'm sorry, but if it was a Chinese part, might work, might not. You don't know. And then, you know, if you want to get the OEM one, this is super expensive. This whole deal is super expensive if you buy this OEM part. I think I looked up for this engine, like a new OEM part from the manufacturer, or even a Quicksilver one, was like $800 for the motor. Very expensive. But he bought this, and I was looking because he had the receipt in here, and it was like he paid a couple $100. So even a couple $100, I mean, it's an expensive motor. very common that they fail, you know. Anyway, I could show, maybe I'll shoot some video like how it looks on the motor. To get this motor out, even though we floated the engine, we still had to take the side mounting bracket off, which means that I had to take the steering cable out, which is another good thing. It was like really, really bad. There was a lot of dried, emulsified grease, so I'm gonna have to clean that out. Cleaned up the steering cable up pretty good, but we have lots of dried emulsified grease and things, so clean that one up, get the new motor on the side bracket. Luckily is pretty simple because it just has some bolts that it bolts on the side. It's not like a lot of the trim units where you have this one big bolt that goes all the way through, and I recommend not beating them out because then you're just gonna destroy the bolt. Yeah, I mean, it's usually a big bolt that goes through, so you'll just destroy the head even if you try to use just a nut and trying to use something to drive it through, even with like a brass hammer. It's just going to destroy them. And getting the pin out of the piston, that's another way you can do it. You can take, and usually if you loosen with a spanner wrench the top cap on the piston, it'll go up, come up out of the thing, and then if it has the one bolt through, you can get the motor to bend down. And usually you got to take out, this is our manual release valve. His kind of threw me for a loop a little bit too, because on his there's usually an E-clip here that prevents it from being able to come out. So I've recommended to him to replace this manual release valve. I believe Tim's got all that ordered. But to tilt the motor down, usually you got to take this out, and then there's usually a fill tube. Sometimes there's a fill tube on the side. On these Mercurys, there's a little fill tube that you got to take that off as part of the reservoir. The manual release valve have some kind of tub there, like an oil change tub to catch your fluid, because you're going to lose some fluid, and you'll have to refill it, cycle it a bunch of times. It will eventually cycle up and down. His switches, all his other, everything is fine. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm doing with that. I've got it all covered up outside, so otherwise I would show you that part of it. But I thought I would just shoot this, and then, you know, you can kind of get an idea if it helps you, like changing out your motor. Sometimes, like, you think, oh, this is really, really simple, and you will find out that sometimes the things that are really simple and you think are really simple are not. And that's probably my fault. But both of these are keyed. It looks kind of like this one looks a little like a hex. Sometimes they're just like a square bodied. Yeah, and this one's the same way. It's got a little, it's almost like a hex pin, but it's milled that way. So that just fits down into here, and that's what turns the motor one way or the other way to make it go up or make it go down. Anyway, thanks for watching.